Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to MTGO Traders. My name is Terran, and this is Ravnica Legion set review for Red. So we've gone over several colors so far. Let's get into Red, not wasting any of our time. Starting up with Act of Treason, a 3-mana sorcery. Gain control of target creature until end of turn. Untap that creature. It gains haste until end of turn. So we have a rating scale at the bottom here. We're going to rate this a 3 out of 5. It's basically in the average for us for limited here for draft and for sealed. Act of Treason, been in a ton of sets. Very, very good at being able to kind of turn your opponent's best creature against them. Just a great card in Red for Rakdos, or again for Gruul if you want to do that. For again Standard, you don't really want to use this at all in Standard. This is going to be a 5. Not usable in that format. A little too slow for that format. Still really fun though for draft and for sealed, and that's why it's obviously a 3. Next, of course, we have Amplifier here. This is a 4-mana creature elemental. It's a 1/1. At the beginning of your upkeep, reveal cards from the top of your library until you reveal a creature card. Until your next turn, Amplifier's base power becomes twice that card's power, and its base toughness becomes twice that card's toughness. Put the revealed card on the bottom of your library in a random order. So for me, due to the random nature of this card, I'm going to give this a 3 in draft and in sealed. It feels like it's a card that might be very powerful, or a card that might just do nothing. Also a card that might just die immediately since it's a 4-mana 1/1, so an opponent might have some form of removal once this comes out, since this does come out towards the mid to late portion of the match. For Standard here, I'm going to give this a 3 as well. I think this might be quite good in some particular situations where you have really nice ways to kind of protect this creature, but at the same time, it's still a 4-mana creature that's a 1/1, and it doesn't really do anything until your next turn, so that's a little bit of a downside here for me, so just gonna be at the 3 for me for Standard. Next, of course, we have Burn Bright. Love the art on this, very eye-catching. It's a 3-mana instant. Creatures you control get +2/+0 until end of turn. Very simple, very straightforward, basically the Trumpet Blast of the set. Very fun for us for draft and for sealed. This is going to go at the 3-drop slot, kind of a average card for you for Red. A card you definitely want to hold on to and, you know, kind of go with the Alpha Strike. And if your opponent starts with the blocks, you can just go Burn Bright and hopefully either win through that attack or get really nice trades. As far as this card seeing play in Standard, it's not going to. It's a 5. It's not going to see play. Too expensive, too kind of narrow in its focus, which is definitely for limited value only. Next, of course, here we have Burning Tree Vandal. This is a 3-mana 2/1 human rogue with Riot. This is the Gruul mechanic here. This creature enters the battlefield with your choice of a +1/+1 counter or haste. So very, very nice. One of the things I want to talk about for Riot real quickly is that it doesn't stack on top of each other, but if you have Riot coming in and there's another form of Riot on the battlefield, like with Rhythm of the Wild, we'll talk about that with multicolors, Riots do happen sequentially, so they don't stack, but they do happen one after the other, so they can happen twice on the same creature, which is very nice. Whenever Burning Tree Vandal attacks, you may discard a card. If you do, draw a card. So very good card, very straight up and simple, but it could be a 2/1 with haste, or it can be a 3/2 attacking the following turn. Either way, we get to kind of cycle a card if you want to, and for 3 mana for a common, this is a very good card for us. Burning Tree Vandal for me is going to be at the 2 slot for us in the point system for limited for draft and for sealed. And for Standard, it's probably not going to see any kind of play because it's kind of a very narrow card for limited play, but still really, really fun. Might see some play in Standard, you never know. A lot of these looters like this can kind of bounce in and out of Standard, especially when it's a haste looter like this. You can definitely do that, but I do think that Burning Tree Vandal, a solid 2 in limited. Next up for us here, we have Cavalcade of Calamity. Say that 3 times fast. This is a 2-mana enchantment. Whenever a creature you control with power 1 or less attacks, Cavalcade of Calamity deals 1 damage to that player or planeswalker that creature is attacking. So very interesting card here. To me, I'm going to give this a 2-drop slot in limited as well as a 2 in Standard. I think this is very powerful, especially in Standard where we have a ton of low to the ground format creatures where Cavalcade of Calamity can just continually ping your opponent's life total or a planeswalker turn over turn until they are dead. I really like this card for that particular situation. In limited, I think this card is fantastic. Again, try and get into a nice Gruul or maybe a nice Rakdos list where you have a lot of low to the ground creatures, and a Cavalcade of Calamity will be able to kind of ping them down 2, 3, maybe even 4 points before they have an effective removal spell for your creature. Next, of course, we have Clamor Claymore? Shaman? This is a 3-mana 1/1 Goblin Shaman with Riot. Whenever Claymore Shaman attacks, target creature and opponent controls can't block this turn. This is sort of a premier attacker for you in draft and in sealed. Claymore Shaman for us is going to be a solid 2, and for standard, it's going to be a solid 4. Probably won't see play in standard, but I will give it the benefit of the doubt as it does attack in and an opponent's creature can't block. So quite good. Solid 2 for us, though, in limited. One of those great creatures where basically if they only have one creature on their side of the field, you have the field basically unblockable for your creatures. Very good card overall. And having Riot on this means it's going to come out with haste if you wanted to, or a 2/2 the following turn. So again, Riot being very flexible for you in the early, mid, or late game. Next, of course, we have Dagger Caster. This is a 4-mana 2/3, one of my favorites of this set here. It's an uncommon. Whenever it enters a battlefield, it deals 1 damage to each opponent and 1 damage to each creature your opponents control. Very, very powerful. Love Dagger Caster. I think for limited, it's a solid 1. This is the anti-Orzhov card here, the anti-Afterlife card. Everything that's on the battlefield, if it's a 1/1 flyer or has 1 toughness, it's going to die on your opponent's side of the field, and they also take 1 point to their face. Very, very powerful. Could also see some play in Commander as well. This won't see much play for us in standard since we already have Goblin Chain Whirler. I'm gonna say Electromancer. Goblin Chain Whirler in the formats. So really won't see much play in standard, but still really, really fun for limited. Just one of those kind of rare examples where it's just a fantastic number 1 for us in limited, but a 5 in standard. Next up, we have Deface here, a 1-mana sorcery. Choose 1, destroy target artifact, or destroy target creature with Defender. So I really like how Deface is here because there are a lot of Defenders in the format. However, it's a very narrow card for us. So I'm going to give it a 4, and for standard, I'm going to give it a 5. Unless we have a standard Arcades deck kind of pop up that's really, really powerful for us in standard. Deface may not even see play ever. It's just kind of one of those cards where it's very good for limited interaction, but only if you have like a game 2 where this card kind of comes into play a little bit more for that particular matchup. Now, for like a best of 1 in Arena, Deface really doesn't do that much for you, so not a big fan of it there. Next, of course, here we have Electro Dominance. This is a X and 2 red instant rare. Electro Dominance deals X damage to any target, and you may cast a card with converted mana cost X or less from your hand without paying its mana cost. Electro Dominance for me is a 1 in draft, limited, and standard. Electro Dominance is sort of scary, honestly, in draft, where you get to burn or destroy something on their side of the field and then cast an additional thing. Very, very powerful card. Love this card. Cannot wait to see play in standard with kind of a lot of tweaking. This could be in a huge list for us for Is It Drakes, or maybe even for a mono red burn list, maybe a Rakdos burn list. This card is crazy, and of course it makes cards where you could even run cards that don't even have like the correct mana in your deck list thanks to Electro Dominance, because it's just casting stuff without paying its mana cost. Very powerful. Love Electro Dominance for standard. Next up here we have Feral Maka. This is a 2-mana 2/2 vanilla creature. It's a cat. I love the art, but sadly, the Maka here is going to be probably a 3 or a 4 in draft and in sealed. It's just one of those cards where it kind of does, you know, fulfill a role quite nicely in that it does do a 2/2 toughness and power. But in standard here, it's going to be a 5. It's basically useless in that format. Please don't play it. There aren't really enough cat stuff or cat matters decks in the format to matter. And it's also in red, which is also pretty awkward. So don't really play this in standard. You can kind of go with a 3 here in draft and in sealed, though. It's fine. Next up for us, we have Flames of the Razeboar. This is a 6-mana instant. Flame of the Razeboar deals 4 damage to target creature and opponent controls. Then Flame of the Razeboar deals 2 damage to each other creature that player controls if you control a creature with power 4 or greater. So this is a premier Gruul spell for you in draft and in sealed. So Flame of the Razeboar is going to be a solid 3 for us in draft and in sealed. And for standard, it's going to be a 5. Not that great, not that useful. It's a little expensive for that format, honestly. It is an instant speed spell, though, which is very good. So if opponent decides to play stuff, you get to respond with an instant speed spell. If you have a 4 toughness creature, you even get to kind of board wipe them a little bit as well, which is very good too. So I really love this for the Gruul list. Getting that 4 toughness trigger is actually not terrible and not hard to do really at all once we go over the green cards. I think this is one of the better removal spells for us in red, especially if you're in the Gruul color archetype for limited. Next, of course, we have Gates Ablaze. This is a 3-mana sorcery. Gates Ablaze deals X damage to each creature where X is the number of gates you control. Very simple, very straightforward. Can be a board wipe, which is very, very good for us. It is a sorcery speed spell, so you can't really do it at instant speed. That is kind of disappointing. but I do think this is quite much, a little bit better in standard than it is in limited or sealed, or draft or sealed. So Gates of Blades for us is going to be probably a 3 for us in draft and sealed. And for standard, I put it at the 5, but I do think it might be a 4 or a 3 after kind of having firsthand experience with dealing with some Gates decks so far in the format. So I do think there might be some play to be seen in standard, but maybe not at the moment. It is a little slow, again, being a sorcery speed spell. Next up for us, we have the Gore Clan Wrecker. This is a 4 mana creature human warrior. It's a 2/2, has Riot, and it also has Menace here. I really like this card, so it's me a 3 for me for draft and for sealed. Reason being, of course, is Menace means they can't be blocked except by more than 2 creatures, which is great. And then Riot is, of course, giving it haste or giving it a +1/+1 counter. So giving it a good way to be larger for 4 mana and have Menace. I like this a lot. I think this is quite powerful in the format for draft and for sealed. As far as standard goes, this is going to be a 5 for me. Not that great at all, but can be really fun in some scenarios where you have, a lot of good ways to kind of come back against your opponent. But for standard, not not going to see much play. Moving on here, we have Goblin Gathering. This is a 3 mana sorcery. Create a number of 1/1 red goblin tokens equal to 2 plus the number of cards named Goblin Gathering in your graveyard. So this is a weird like storm kind of card that's gonna be in standard, which is really fun. For draft and for sealed, Goblin Gathering is probably really good here if you get into multiples. If even the base amount is just a 3 mana create 2 creatures, which is perfectly fine and perfectly serviceable. But if you get into multiples of these in your draft or sealed pool, Goblin Gathering can just go off, which is very, very good. So love it for that as well. For standard here, I'm going to give it probably a 3 here, since you can put 4 into your deck. So seeing more Goblin Gatherings hit the graveyard is more likely in that particular format. However, that particular format is very fast, so you do want to kind of keep that in mind when you're going into standard. So I'm not sure this is going to see much play in standard, but it is really fun regardless. Next up here for us, we have a Gravelhide Goblin, a 2 mana 2/1 Goblin Shaman. You can pay 4 with a green, and the Gravelhide Goblin gets +2/+2 until end of turn. So for me, this is a solid 3 for draft and for sealed. It's one of those few creatures in the deck list where it gets to pump itself turn over turn, which is very, very good in most matchups. As far as standard goes, this is going to be a 5. Not great, not playable in that format. I do think that Gravelhide Goblin, though, is quite good in draft and sealed and will be a high pick for you, especially in the early kind of turns of a draft. And of course, it's going to be a great 2-drop slot for you in your sealed deck as well. Next up here, we have the Immolation Shaman. This is a 2 mana 1/3 Vaishino Shaman rare. Whenever an opponent activates an ability of an artifact, creature, or land that isn't a mana ability, the Immolation Shaman deals 1 damage to that player. You can pay 5, and the Shaman gets +3/+3 and gains Menace until end of turn. So one of the things for me is the Shaman kind of doesn't do a lot for draft and sealed, so it's going to be at the 3 slot for us for limited here. As far as seeing play for standard, I think it's probably going to be in the 2-drop slot. It's pretty good against some matchups. It's kind of terrible against others, so it could be a decent sideboard card, but for the most part, it might not see play in standard. I do think it has potential to see play. As far as draft and sealed goes, this could be a 2 mana 1/3, which is great, and then the mid to late game, it could be a 2 mana 4/6 with Menace, which is much better. And of course, you can pay 10 mana if you can do this twice. That's also hilarious too, and it kind of has like an added ability on top of that. So again, having these pump abilities through the mid and late game of matches in draft and sealed is what makes these cards so much better. Moving up here, we have Light Up the Stage. This is a 3 mana sorcery with Spectacle cost for 1. Of course, Spectacle is the Rakdos ability, so you may cast a spell for its Spectacle cost rather than its mana cost if an opponent lost life this turn. Exile the top 2 cards of your library until the end of your next turn. You may play those cards. So one of the best things about Light Up the Stage is you can play this, you can tap out completely, and then you can, return to your next turn with mana untapped, and then cast the spells that you drew with Light Up the Stage, making this much better in hindsight. So I think this card is quite good in draft and in sealed, and probably going to see a lot of play in standard. So I'm going to give this a 2 slot for the points here for us for draft and for sealed, as well as a 2 slot for us for standard. Quite good, giving you a good way to kind of basically use 3 cards off the top of your deck without really having to spin the mana to, or kind of draw into them without having to discard. So if you have 7 cards and you have 2 cards from Light of the Stage in exile for that turn, you can still use them the following turn, and that's very good for most red decks. So I think this will see a lot of brew around play, especially in standard. Next up for us, we have Mirror Match, a 6 mana enchantment rare. Whenever a non-token creature enters the battlefield under your control, flip a coin until you lose a flip. For each flip you won, create a token that's a copy of that creature. Those tokens gain haste, exile them at the beginning of the next end step. So Mirror Match to me feels like a hilarious kind of win condition for you for limited, so it's going to be a 3 slot for us for the point system. As far as standard goes, Mirror Match is going to be a 5, too expensive to kind of get out. But for draft and for sealed, it's hilarious if you get to the mid to late game and you're in Gruul and you get to play a creature and like make 5 copies of it until you lose a roll. That's hilarious. I think this is really fun. So this will be really interesting for us for draft and for sealed and for commander, of course. But again, for standard, not going to see any kind of play. Just way too expensive for that format. Moving up here, we have Rick's Mighty Reveler. This is a 2-mana 2/2 human shaman rare with spectacle cost for 4. Whenever it enters a battlefield, discard a card, then draw a card. If the spectacle cost was paid instead, discard your hand, then draw 3 cards. This is basically Bedlam Reveler on a stick here for us as well for the spectacle cost. Very, very powerful for us. Really like this card in draft sealed and in standard. So Reveler for me is going to be probably at the 3 slot for draft sealed and standard for both. I do think it is a card that we'll probably see play in a weird like niche deck or combo style deck in standard, and we'll definitely see play anytime anybody draws into it for their Rakdos list or for their Gruul list, especially in draft and in sealed. So Reveler for me, quite good. Again, refilling your hand with a lot of stuff to do, so very powerful on that end. Next, of course, we have Rubble Reading. This is a 4-mana sorcery. Destroy target land, scry for 2. Very simple, very straightforward. So it's going to be probably a 5 for me because it's not great. For draft sealed or in standard, just a card that doesn't really do much at all. Destroying target land really doesn't do much anymore, not as much as it used to anyway. So I'm not sure this is going to see any kind of play whatsoever in any format. So just kind of one of those things where being able to scry 2 in draft and sealed is fine. It's probably okay, but again, 4 mana for scry 2, not great. Next up here for us, we have Rebel Belt Recluse. This is a 5-mana 6/5 Ogre Berserker. The Recluse can attacks each combat if able. It's not a can attack, it has to attack. Attacks each combat if able. A 5-mana 6/5 is huge, and attacking each turn if able is perfectly fine and perfectly serviceable for us. So I think this is going to be a 3 slot for us for draft and for sealed. As far as standard goes, cards like this where you have to do certain things every single turn, not that useful in that format. This would be a 5 for that. But I do think for draft and for sealed, this is really huge bomb for you and really powerful. Moving right along here, we have the Rumbling Ruin here. This is a 6-mana 6/6 elemental. It's an uncommon. When the Rumbling Ruin enters the battlefield, count the number of +1/+1 counters on creatures you control. Creatures your opponents control with power less than or equal to that number can't block this turn. So if you're in Gruul and you have counters on everything, Rumbling Ruin is a great way to make your entire opponent's entire board state not able to block, and then you just swing in for the win. So very nice. If you don't have that ability, it's just a 6-mana 6/6, which is still fine as well in red. So I feel like the Rumbling Ruin is going to be probably around the 3 slot for us for draft and for sealed. As far as standard goes, this is a 5, not that well suited for that particular format, just too expensive, and again, doesn't have haste or anything like that. So it's going to give you the ability to make, your opponent's board state probably, not be able to block for the turn it enters the battlefield, which is nice. And then the following turn, we get to attack out with a Rumbling Ruin, which is pretty good as well. Moving on here, we have Scorchmark, a 2-mana instant. Deals 2 damage to target creature. If that creature would die this turn, exile it instead. Instant speed removal against a creature. Simple, straightforward. This is going to be a 3 for me for draft and for sealed. The only issue that it's not going to be like a 2 or a 1 is that Magma Spray exists in just in the amount of magic that there is, and that's seen a lot of play normally. It's also hitting any targets, or also hitting creatures as well. So I think Scorchmarks to me just doesn't do enough. It's going to do enough for you being good removal, but for 2 mana, it's a little expensive for that format. And as far as seeing play in draft or in standard, it's going to be a 5 there. Just too expensive for that format. We have, so many cheaper removal spells right now that hit any target instead of just a creature. Moving up here, we have the Skargon Hellkite. This is a 5-mana 4/4 dragon with Riot. Flying, we can also pay 4 and deals 2 damage divided as you choose among 1 or 2 targets. Activates this ability only if the Hellkite has a +1/+1 counter on it. So you can either have a hasty 4/4 flyer, or you can have a 5/5 flyer that actually gets to ping opponent's creatures for 4 mana. I think this is very powerful. I think this is one of the few cards where it gives you a lot of flexibility in the draft and sealed environment. So For me, I'm going to go with a Hellkite being a solid 2, probably a 1 for us for draft and for sealed. For the situation for standard, it's probably going to be a 3. Not that powerful. It is super powerful in that it is a 5 mana 4/4 with haste, which is quite good. It's also flying, which is also good. But a 5 mana 5/5 flyer that gets to ping stuff the following turn. A little slow in the Gruul format for us, or in the Gruul archetype for standard, so not sure if this will see much play in standard. We had Glorybringer, which was a 4 mana 4/4 hasty that got to hit for 4 and then not untap, which was amazing because it did 4 points of damage for basically free. So very powerful, but the Hellkite isn't quite that yet. A lot of people are kind of saying this is like kind of a fixed Glorybringer, and I can kind of agree with that to an extent. Next up for us, we have Skewer the Critics. This is a 3 mana sorcery, spectacle cost for 1, and it deals 3 damage to any target. This is simple, this is straightforward, this is a 1 across the board. So for draft and for sealed, being able to ping something for 3 mana isn't terrible. It's not great, but being able to get off the spectacle cost and having this be a 1 mana basically lightning bolt in draft and sealed is amazing. And in standard, this is going to be a lightning bolt, and it's ridiculous. This basically brings up the lightning bolts in standard to 12, which is crazy. And yeah, mono red burn is insane right now in standard. Next of course, we have Smeltward Ignis. This is a 2 mana 2/1 elemental. You can pay 3, sacrifice Smeltward Ignis, gain control of target creature with power 3 or less until end of turn, untap that creature, it gains haste until end of turn, activate this ability only anytime you could cast a sorcery. So very interesting here. I'm going to go with the Ignis being probably a 3 in the draft and sealed environment, and for standard going to be a 4, a little bit slower there. I do like how we get to basically active treason something on our opponent's side of the field, so very nice thanks to this being on the battlefield. So very cool for that. It's however not going to be a powerful creature as it is going to be a power 3 or less until end of turn, so not that amazing. So what you might want to do is you might want to grab something where you can immediately sack it or use it for something else on your side of the field, so there could be that. Of course, if your opponent does have just 1 blocker or they're at near death, then this could be a great way to kind of take a blocker away from them too. Next of course, we have Spear Spewer. This is a 1 red mana 0/2 Goblin Warrior with Defender. It has a tap. Spear Spewer deals 1 damage to each player. Now for Commander, this is really fun. For draft and sealed, I think the Spewer is perfectly fine, perfectly serviceable as a great turn 1 play for you, and being able to ping turn over turn if your opponent didn't attack in, or if you just don't want to block with a Spewer, that's perfectly usable. For standard for us, I feel like the Spewer is going to be unplayable, bit of a 5. It is quite low in the cheap, as far as cheap and like usable in that regard, but I'm not so sure this is going to see much play other than, you know, maybe some like brew around play with a burn deck. But again, we have so many burn like cards in the format at the moment that I don't think the Spewer is really going to make it into that list. Next up for us, we have the Spike Wheel Acrobat. This is a 4 mana 5/2 human rogue, spectacle cost for 3. So this could be a 3 mana 5/2, which is perfectly serviceable for us for draft and for sealed. So this is going to be a 3 for me for that particular format. For standard, this is going to be a 5. Again, it doesn't do anything else after it hits the battlefield, so that is one of the downsides to these cards, where if they have spectacle cost, kind of like the Madness cards of old, where they just had Madness and that was it. This is similar to that. I wish it had haste on top of it because it would make this card much better, but since it does not, it doesn't really do anything else for me, and that's kind of sad. Moving up here, we have the Storm Strike. I almost said Spike. Storm Strike. This is a 1 red mana instant. Target creature gets +1/+0 and gains first strike until end of turn. Scry for 1. The Scry 1 on this is actually quite good, as well as being a decent way to have a combat trick on your side of the field. So this is a 3-point system, or 3 points out of 5 for us for draft and for sealed for limited. And for standard, it doesn't do enough. We have Sure Strike in the format, so this is going to be a 5 for us there. And that's basically it for this card. The last card for us in red here is the 10 Street Dodger, a 1 mana 1/1 Goblin Rogue with haste. We can pay 1 red, and the Dodger can't be blocked this turn except by creatures with Defender. So this could be a really great card for you in most limited environments. So this is going to be a 2 for us. Very fantastic at being able to get in for points on turn 1, as well as repeated points if you're willing to just kind of dip 1 red mana into your mana pool. So very interesting for that particular format. For standard, this might be a 3 for us. Again, very good for us at being able to kind of attack in really cheaply and really effectively turn over turn with like basically unblockable status if opponent doesn't have Defender. And unless opponent has like a Arcades deck or a random Defender in a like mill deck or something in standard, this 10 Street Dodger here is basically unblockable affordable if you're willing to pay for that red mana. So very interesting card. I really think this will see some standard play for sure, or some standard brew round play, probably with the Calamity card we talked about, the Cavalcade of Calamity we talked about at the beginning of the video. But that is all the cards in red. So far, I'm kind of liking red. I think it's not as powerful as probably black or white. I do think there are quite a bit removal. Skewer is amazing. Probably the best red card in the set, might be the best card in the set as far as a common goes, because it is a common, which is ridiculous, but very good card either way. Very good as far as red goes in general. Let me know what you think in the comments down below. Of course, like the video if you like it, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and I'll have another video coming up pretty soon. And of course, wrapping up all the set reviews and putting them in a nice playlist. They should be in playlists now, but you know, just letting you guys know. And then after that, we'll get into our deck techs next week. So love you guys. See you in the next video. Peace.